This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and in the studio with me, our old friend Medea Benjamin, co-founder, Global Exchange and Code Pink, author of the new book Kingdom of the Unjust: Behind the U.S.-Saudi Connection. And by the way, if you want, I believe I've done a reading of that book and of your book. We do a book report every morning, and you've been on talking about it. But I just want to emphasize one more time: if anybody listening wants to know what's really going on with Saudi Arabia and our relationship with it, your book is brilliant. Absolutely.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Tom.
Thank you for joining us.
We were out in front of the Saudi embassy yesterday doing a protest on an issue that very few people know about.
Tell us about it.
It's about the siege of Awamiyah. Have you heard of that?
I have not.
So even you, who knows a lot about a lot of things, starting May 10th, the Saudis rolled into Awamiyah, a Shia town in the eastern province. They said that they were looking...
Saudi Arabia.
Of Saudi Arabia, within their own country. They had two excuses. One is that they were going to do a redevelopment scheme in the oldest 400-year-old neighborhood there, which is a heritage site for the Shia, but also that they were looking for 10 wanted men. Well, there's a relationship between that, because that town is a town of dissent. That's where Sheikh Nimr is from, who was executed at the beginning of this year. He was telling the people during the Arab Spring that the Shias had the right to be equal citizens. So they came in and they've put that town under siege. They're destroying the entire town. They have been killing people, destroying their homes. It looks like a war zone when you look at it now. And the U.S. press is not covering at all. And we had somebody who came in, two people from Awamiyah came with us yesterday to the Saudi embassy. And we protested the siege of Awamiyah, as well as the 32 mostly young men, some of them arrested, adolescents that are on death row, all Shia, because of their protests against the Saudi regime.
Or protests in favor of democracy. I mean, that came out of the Arab Spring, didn't it?
That's right. And these people are now facing beheadings by the Saudi government. So that's why we were out there yesterday.
Good on you. Good on you. I'm just astonished by the ads that they're running on the television here in Washington, D.C.
Are those terrible?
Qatar.
Oh, my goodness.
It's mind-boggling. But what I wanted to talk to you about today, you were in Korea last week.
That's right.
So tell us about your trip. Tell us what you learned. Tell us I don't know how much of the last hour you were able to hear here. I think you just arrived a little bit ago. Okay, so you didn't hear it. I just went through this whole riff about how, in my opinion, Kim is not an irrational actor. His family is not irrational. They've been very successful, running their little dictatorship all these years. And I find it just so bizarre. Ironic is not even a strong enough word, that many of us are looking to Kim Jong-un to be the sane voice in the room.
I know.
At this particular moment in history. So anyhow, let me turn the platform over to you. What did you
being
learn?
in South Korea was so interesting because, they have heard the rhetoric from the North for decades now. They're used to these kind of crazy things that the government of North Korea would put out. And when I was in North Korea, I would read some of their terrible English translations of some of the government propaganda, and it would just be awful stuff. But, that's kind of that's the way the Korean government talks. What's new in the equation is Donald Trump.
Talking the same way.
Yeah. And they're not used to that. The South Koreans are not used to that. So
nobody's used to that.
They were way more concerned about Donald Trump than they were about Kim Jong-un, because they've been saying, he wants to preserve himself. It's all about self-preservation. It's not about attacking South Korea, and it's certainly not about attacking the United States. So, yes, this has thrown things off. We were there invited to meet with people who had been opposing the anti-missile system, the THAAD system. And it was really interesting going to the village where this has been placed and talking to villagers who said, we don't want this here. Take it back. Get rid of this thing. We don't want to be in the crosshairs.
Yeah, now that was more of the way you're characterizing it was more of a NIMBY response. But there's a national...
It was a NIMBY response, but then, they've become more sophisticated over the entire year that they're protesting. Mm-hmm. And now it's, we don't want it somewhere else. We don't want it anywhere. And we don't even want it. They were very sweet to us. They said, we used to say, take it back to the United States, but since we've met such nice people like you, we now say, just dismantle it. that it's part of the buildup of the arms race that's not good for anyone. And then we met with people in the National Assembly. We met with all kinds of people, and they're saying, look, we think that for the first time in a long time with the new president that's been pro-dialogue, we have a chance for
this new president of South Korea, who was just elected on a platform of let's work with North Korea, let's talk with North Korea, let's achieve a rapprochement, let's amp down, turn down the volume here.
And your listeners have probably really not heard of what they call the Candlelight Uprising. And this was the uprising that got rid of the last president on corruption charges and brought in a new president of South Korea, Moon, who was swept into power on the wave of this incredibly beautiful, nonviolent, massive protest. When you see the photos, it's millions of people coming out to the streets, and of course a much smaller population than here in the United States. So they have been very excited about what this new government might bring, and now they suddenly see, uh-oh, things are going sour really, really quickly.
Right. Let's talk about the THAAD missile system for a minute. This is as I recall, truck-mounted. It's a mobile system. Right. It can fire about a dozen or so missiles off the back?
Well, there's 8 of them on, yeah.
And the theory, this is bullets hitting bullets, basically. Somebody's shooting a missile at you, you shoot a THAAD, it hits that missile, and presumably it can't do it as the missile is taking off. They're traveling super fast. It can't do it at apogee as the missile is at the top of its arc. They're traveling super fast. So it would have to do it when it's coming back down, which, seems... I'm curious what you know about how advanced that technology is. That's the big problem that Reagan had with Star Wars, is they could never, it's how do you shoot a bullet out of the sky with another bullet? And it's just insanely difficult to do, although bullets are dumb, and in theory these missiles are smart, number one. But number two, if this is a nuclear warhead and you're shooting it as it's coming down from the arc, you're blowing off a nuclear bomb over your own head. How does that work?
Well, the way that people over there have talked to us is to say that, first of all, they've been talking about the not nuclear warhead. They've been talking about the missiles that the Koreans have been testing, and saying that the tests in the United States of this missile system have been done under, quote, perfect conditions. We in the U.S. shoot off our missiles. We in the U.S. shoot down those missiles. Right. And of course, the Lockheed Martin says, we get it every time. These are 100%. These are great. And what the South Koreans say, this is ridiculous because this is not real life. In real life, the North Koreans know that they're going to have to project a lot of missiles at the same time, that they are trying now to have missiles that don't have a straight trajectory, and they also know to use decoys. So you add all of that into the equation, and they say this missile system, this anti-missile system is just not going to work in real life. The other thing they say is about we have not had a real environmental impact assessment to know what having this big radar system, because it comes with a massive radar system, what this means for the area surrounding where the system is located. And they also say that the range for shooting down this missile doesn't include Seoul, which is where the vast majority of the South Koreans live. They say that it's really meant to protect the bases that the U.S. has in South Korea, rather than protecting the people of Seoul, who live only 35 miles away from the border.
Wow. So the bottom line is the THAAD system,
they don't feel that it's a protection for them. And there's a THAAD system in Guam as well.
Yeah.
And they are saying similar things there, that they don't feel protected by the THAAD system. It really feels like, to a lot of people, it's something that is making them part of the target, and is then making the North Koreans or whoever feel like they have to develop more sophisticated missile systems that then you would need a more...
And what was the first thing we did when we decided we were going to take out Saddam Hussein in Iraq? We flew planes over and blew up his anti-ballistic missile systems. His surface-to-air radar systems, all of his defenses, his air defenses, basically. Right. This is an air defense. Yeah. So, you know, I don't know to what extent the North Koreans could do it from the air, and I don't know to what extent they've infiltrated the South and could even get the equivalent of a suicide bomber in there or something like that. But
I think more than anything else, it's probably a $1 billion plus gift to Lockheed Martin.
That's the bottom line. Yeah, that's very unfortunate. We're talking with Medea Benjamin, co-founder of Global Exchange and Code Pink, author of Kingdom of the Unjust, behind the U.S.-Saudi connection, who just came back from South Korea, or from Korea. We just have less than a minute left, Medea. What would you encourage people to do right now?
I think now we have to build up an anti-war movement again. We have to build up a movement that can mobilize people, that can contact our representatives. We had 60 representatives sign a letter. We should have hundreds of them signing a letter, say, no war with North Korea. So I would say during this interim break that people should be calling their representatives, leaving messages on the White House hotline, and joining in protests that we organize.
Yeah, it seems like it's definitely a good time. The number, by the way, for Congress is 202-224-3121. And even though they're on their month-long vacation, you know, it's incredible. Even though they're on their vacation, they will be answering their phones and they will be doing these things. What groups are out in the forefront of this? Has anybody really jumped, you know, picked up this flag?
Yeah, we've been having all kinds of meetings and coalitions and groups coming together. There's Korean American groups that have been very active. There are groups like Peace Action, anti-nuke groups, one called Global Zero. There's a good coalition.
Code Pink.
Code Pink, yes. We are out there, yeah. And we are also telling people to call the White House, which is 202-456-1111, but you can only call it between 9 and 4 p.m. because Donald Trump has cut down the hours.
Right. I know, it's very, very strange. Medea Benjamin. Thank you, Medea.
Thank you. Good
talking. We'll be back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be back in just a minute. This woman is saying some really cool stuff. M-U-S-C-A-T-O, Danielle Moscato. She says, this is to Donald Trump in response to his tweeting about Saturday Night Live, right? She said, do you know how many children went to bed tonight without enough food to eat? Do you even care? What is wrong with you? No, of course you don't know these things. You don't even know what a blind trust is, and you call yourself a businessman. You're pathetic. You ran for president for attention. You're a fake, a fraud. You never wanted to win anyway. We can all see it. You're not fooling anyone. You're scared and overwhelmed, and you have absolutely no idea what you're doing, and it shows. You think you're all that we're all too polite, too aghast to call you out. I see through you, Donnie. I'm calling you out. You're a joke. With every fiber of my being, I'm disgusted by you. And you know what the real secret is? You're disgusted by you, too, she's saying to Donald Trump. That's why you surround yourself with gold and beautiful women that you objectify. You know you're a loser, so you try to make yourself feel better, feel successful, authoritative with things. Money. You're an imposter. You're a fraud. I'm ashamed of you. The world is ashamed. You spout nonsense. Millions of illegal voters, even you don't believe it. It's absurd. You think we're stupid? You think we don't know what you're doing? Trying to control the narrative, get your followers to distrust the media, the polls, news reporters, so that they must turn to you for what's true, what's real? There's a name for that. It's called propaganda. We know what you're doing. We will not allow you to suppress votes with this nonsense. We will not allow you to trample our civil rights. We will not allow you to destroy the progress we've made. We will resist. I call upon progressives, Democrats, independents, and Republicans to resist, #resist fascism, resist Donald Trump, resist crony capitalism, resist hypocrisy. When Donald Trump lies, acknowledge and call it out as propaganda. When he tests boundaries, acknowledge and call it out as fascism. Resist. We cannot wait and see. Real Donald Trump is telling us here and now what he's going to do. Believe him. Millions of illegal votes is not a claim about reality, despite what Donald Trump's pretense. It is a warning, a threat. Pay attention. Resist. Donald Trump is telling us he'll suppress our votes. Our democracy is at stake. We cannot wait, let him enact policy, then whine. We must resist. Donald Trump tweets so that we forget that his kids will run a company in a so-called blind trust while sitting in on diplomatic meetings. Trump tweets so we forget that he's stacking his cabinets with the very same people he proposed to remove from his influence. Trump tweets so we ignore that he's clueless at governance. The more outrageous his tweets, the harder it is for us to keep up. We see you, Donald. We know exactly what you're doing. It's not working on us. You're a disgrace and you should be ashamed. The next 4 years will be brutal for me and my fellow civil rights activists. Not all of us will survive, but we will resist. We will resist Donald Trump till racist police are imprisoned. We will resist till full equality for women. We will resist. We are ready. We will resist until abortion is accessible to everyone who needs it, until LGBTQ are safe and healthy, until people of color are safe. Donald Trump, you can fight us on it, and you will, but you will lose because history is on our side. We may not live to see it, but we know we will win. We will fight you every step, so be ready. You can't stop progress no matter how hard you try. I hear in her voice the echo of Sophie Scholl, who, along with her brother, started in Nazi Germany in the 40s, the White Rose Society, which was the resistance movement against Hitler, the student resistance movement against Hitler.
Hi there, I'm Marie with Free Speech TV. Your support, whether through giving donations, volunteering, or spreading the word about Free Speech TV, has made it possible for the only independent progressive news network to exist. And for that, I want to say thank you. Now you can give to the network powered by the people by donating an unwanted or used vehicle through our Vehicles of Change program. If you have an old car, RV, or even a motorcycle, Free Speech TV can use it to grow and thrive. You can make a bigger difference in supporting Free Speech TV by giving an old car. It's a great way to support the network without having to dig into your bank account. Just call 877-378-8669 and ask for more information about Vehicles of Change. Again, the number to call is 877-378-8669. If it has a VIN, we'll take it in. Thank you.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. So let's see here. George in Pasadena, California. George, what's on your mind?
Hello.
George?
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're on the air, George.
Can you hear me?
I hear you just fine.
I'm in Ukiah, California. Ukiah, California.
Uh-huh. Okay. Great. So Ukiah.
First of all, I want to thank you so much for the good job you do on TV, keeping us informed and with good opinions.
Thanks, George. What'd you want to talk about today?
Okay. Well, first of all, you're going to have to bear with me the way I talk because I was involved in a hit-and-run accident, and one of my damage was done to my throat. So I have a hard time speaking. I talk fast or stutter, so you're going to have to bear with me, okay?
Sure.
Okay, first of all, how much dirt do we have to get out of Donald Trump to get him impeached? Don't we have enough dirt on him already to get him impeached? And how would I start a rally, a protest to get all of the Americans that don't like Donald Trump get impeached? I mean,
right.
When I work to get...
No, George, I got it, and thank you for the call. The impeachment is a purely political process. It's not like, some judge says, oh, he broke the law here. Now, impeachment, it says high crimes or misdemeanors, but, look at after 7 years of investigating Bill Clinton, spending tens of millions of dollars exhaustively investigating Bill Clinton. Finally, they discovered that he had been having sex with an intern, and prosecuted and impeached him for lying about it. So you know, it's sort of like, you know, the old saying, some Southern judge who said it, you know, he could get a grand jury to indict a ham sandwich. If the political will is there, impeachment will happen. There's been only 2 times in the history of the United States that the political will was there to even initiate the process. Andrew Johnson, who was Abraham Lincoln's vice president, and from the opposite party. Andrew Johnson was a Democrat, Lincoln was a Republican. And so the people who elected Lincoln were not happy when a Democrat took over. And plus, Andrew Johnson was, you know, being a Democrat, he was all about slowing down Reconstruction. A whole long story there, but the political will was there to impeach Johnson. They just couldn't get that last vote to convict him in the Senate. It failed by 1 vote, just like the Bill Clinton impeachment failed by 1 vote in the Senate. But the important thing to note is that it's a political process. The other thing to note is that there's substantial blowback. When Bill Clinton was impeached, after the final vote was held in the Senate, my recollection is that his popularity ratings had soared. He was up around 2/3 in terms of popularity ratings. Keep in mind, Donald Trump is around 1/3. So, you know, be careful what you wish for.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
If you have an impeachment spectacle like we did with Clinton, and you don't actually remove Trump from office, you're going to have a serious problem. And welcome back to Thom Hartmann University, the Thom Hartmann Book Club. Today we're reading from Attention Deficit Disorder, A Different Perception. I think it's the only book that I've written that Time Magazine has done a story on. This is, we're in chapter 14. Throughout the book, I explain the whole idea of hunters and farmers, that ADD characteristics are something that would help in a hunting-gathering society. They become a liability in an agricultural society. And so this chapter is titled The Edison Trait, Hunters Who Have Changed the World. Hunters sometimes have difficulty answering the question, what do you do for a living? It's not that there isn't an answer, there are too many answers. Hunters of above average or even genius intelligence often have resumes that are startling in their diversity and accomplishment, even though they may have struggled to simply finish high school. Similarly, the stereotype of the eccentric genius or loony creative type is often applied to hunter inventors, artists, writers, and designers. At many ad agencies, the creative types are allowed or even encouraged to have an eccentric appearance with flowered shirts, long hair, jeans, etc. As the chapter on ADD and creativity pointed out, the ability to think innovatively is intrinsically tied to the ability to fall into an open and therefore distractible state of consciousness, one of the characteristics of ADHD. Conversely, to make use of the inspirations gained from such typical hunter-free association, there must be a compensating burst of focused energy in order to bring these concepts into reality. Learning to channel these bursts is the challenge to every hunter. When hunters fail in life, it is often because their self-image was distorted in an early age when they were labeled as a problem. Their assets are also neglected if they plug into a job or a segment of society which requires farmer rather than hunter skills. But let's look at some successful hunters in history who have demonstrated tremendous powers of transformation, vitality, and dynamic energy, and whose biographies appear to conform to the American Psychiatric Association's DSM criteria of ADHD. While it's impossible for us to reach back to historic figures and ask them to answer the questions which might lead to a medically supportable diagnosis of ADHD, their life stories very often give us those answers in a rather overt fashion. Consider the following. The life of Thomas Alva Edison has been an inspiration to hunter boys for nearly a century. Born in the Midwest before the Civil War, Edison wrote, quote, I remember I used never to be able to get along at school. I was always at the foot of the class. I used to feel that the teachers did not sympathize with me and that my father thought I was stupid. Edison complained about the distractions of the other children in his school and the fact that learning was abstract and not real. To be able to actually do something, to test a theory or discover a fact through experience, he wrote in his diary, quote, for one instant was better than learning about something he had never seen for 2 hours, end quote. Believing her son had potential, Edison's mother took over his schooling. Instead of requiring her son to learn a particular curriculum by rote, she instead encouraged him to explore things he found interesting. He soon became a voracious reader and consumed a huge body of knowledge in a wide variety of subjects. Edison left home at the age of 12 and started a long procession of short-lived jobs. The year he was 17, he held 4 different jobs, being fired from each one because of his inattentiveness to the duties or routine of the job. When he was 15, he had a job as a railroad signalman during the night and had to clock in via telegraph every hour. He was fired when his superiors learned that his punctual check-in signal was actually transmitted by a simple invention he'd created from an alarm clock, which would send the Morse code signal on the hour. That invention led to his developing the first automatic telegraph and then the first stock ticker, although he held a dozen more jobs before he received $40,000 for his stock ticker at age 21 and was able to use that money to establish a laboratory where he could devote himself to inventing. Being a classic hunter, Edison usually worked on many projects at the same time. In the year of 1877, for example, we now know that he had more than 40 inventions in process in his laboratory concurrently. He kept his own hours, often working through the night. When he became bored or saturated with one invention, he would quickly hop to another. Edison credited his inability to stick to one task for a long time as being the power of his creative efforts. He wrote, quote, he said, quote, "Look, I start here with the intention of going there," drawing an imaginary line, "in an experiment, say, to increase the speed of the Atlantic cable. But when I've arrived part of the way in my straight line, I meet with a phenomena, and it leads me off in another direction to something totally unexpected," end of quote. Thomas Edison transformed the 20th century with his invention of the electric light bulb, the central power generating station, the phonograph, the flexible celluloid film and movie projector, the alkaline storage battery, and the microphone, merely a few of the more than 1,000 major patents he registered before his death in 1931. Benjamin Franklin flunked out of George Brownell's academy after only 2 years of formal education. It was said that he was slow at doing sums, math, and he utterly failed in arithmetic. His teacher complained that he would never pay attention to his lessons. He spent 2 years as an apprentice candlemaker to his father, but his father's frustrations with young Ben were legion. The boy was always slipping off to explore the town, the salt marshes, and the incoming ships. Having demonstrated his hunter inability to be a scholar in the formal farmer schools of the day, Franklin went on to become one of the most well-educated in terms of practical abilities men in American history. Although he couldn't stick with a single job, Franklin is now celebrated for his accomplishments in dozens of roles. He was a printer, moralist, civic leader, essayist, inventor, scientist, diplomat, publisher, statesman, postmaster, candlemaker, mechanic, and philosopher, among others. His impulsive streak, which was partially responsible for the creation of the United States of America, showed itself early when, at the age of 16, he wrote several articles for the Courant, a Boston newspaper making fun of Boston's authorities and society figures. Anyhow, the book is Attention Deficit Disorder, A Different Perception. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Wow. I don't know if you've seen this piece by James Downey over at the Washington Post. This NSC ex-staffer's memo is crazy. Trump's reaction is more disturbing. But Foreign Policy magazine published this remarkable memo. This is by, as I said, James Downey, by Rich Higgins, who used to work for the National Security. He was a National Security Advisor to H.R. McMaster. And quoting from the Washington Post, the memo contends that the president, that'd be Trump, is the target of a vast conspiracy spearheaded by so-called cultural Marxists who have allied with Islamists and captured the media, among other groups. The deep state, academia, global corporatists, and leaders of both parties. That Higgins worked for the NSC is disturbing enough, but more disturbing is that Trump, who saw the memo when it was passed to him by his son Don Trump Jr., was furious at Higgins' removal, a sign of the scary conspiratorial depths the president has already descended to. Wow. Kyle in Chicago. Hey, Kyle, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. First, I'd like to thank you and for pointing me towards the books by Milton Mayer and Jack Forbes. They've been really great to read after the election, especially.
Yeah, you're welcome. They're both great books. Neither one of them are still with us, but their books live on.
Yes, I agree fully. And the reason I called is I've been curious as to what motivates oligarchs to want to amass more wealth and more power. And I've been trying to run these hypotheses in my head to try to figure out and understand why that would be. And I'm confused because they already have so much wealth and power that they can influence elections and policy positions and pull the strings of government throughout all nations of the world. And to me, it always felt a little too facile of an argument to just blindly call them antisocial or
greedy.
Have degrees of... Say again?
Or greedy.
Yes. There's an emotional part of me that wants to give them a hug in a way, because I feel as though they're just lonely and miserable and have no coping mechanisms whatsoever to be okay feeling sad, being okay feeling scared, being okay feeling disappointed. And I'm curious, is the drive and the motivation to amass all this wealth and all this power just an avoidance technique to not feel sad, to not feel scared, to not feel disappointment, and we are all just pawns in their game to
or victims of their game? Inadvertent, in all probability. I agree with you, Kyle. I've said this many times on the air. I've said it in writing. I've written about it. Last week, I had an Uber driver who was telling me about how she had been taking in homeless people for the last couple of years. It was her personal ministry, is how she described it, and taking them into her home, or helping them get through things. And she talked about this one particular woman who had just become homeless. She had been kicked out of her apartment, and she was a hoarder. And she said this. She said it's amazing. This woman lived in an efficiency apartment. I mean, it was literally one room that was with a bathroom attached to it, but the kitchen, the living room, it was all one giant room or a small room. And she said there was stuff from the floor to the ceiling, old newspapers, every tin can this woman had ever opened, all the packaging material for everything that she had, that had ever, she was just going through this list of all this stuff. And she said, there was these very narrow paths through that you could walk from the door to the stove, and from the stove to the bed, and that was about it. And everything else was all this stuff. And, and she was describing this. She said she was a hoarder. And she said, I've dealt with schizophrenics. I've dealt with people who just aren't all that bright. I've dealt with people who are drug addicted. She said, but nothing was as difficult as dealing with this hoarder, because as she was ripped away from her apartment with all her stuff, even all the stuff was junk, she felt absolutely bereft. She felt like her identity had been torn from her, like there was no more there, like her life was coming to an end. And I, as she was saying this, I was thinking, I wonder if that woman's hoarding compulsion, and it is a compulsion, it's a subset of obsessive compulsive disorder, and it comes out of, in all probability, if we're looking for a psychological answer, it probably comes out of a feeling, some deep-seated feeling of insecurity. If I can only get enough stuff, then I'll be safe.
Yeah.
But it also may just come out of a neurochemical imbalance. It could be that, there's a gene in the wrong place, the wrong allele has been flipped on, or somebody was exposed to some sort of noxious chemistry in utero, and they were just born with a brain that's broken in this particular way, that they have hoarding syndrome. And I was just, and in fact, I said it out loud to her at the car. I don't think that it meant that much to her, because she'd never, I said, do you think that it's possible that hoarding syndrome that homeless woman you took in was experiencing is the exact same thing that billionaires in America, or not all billionaires, but a few, the ones who are like just aggressively more. I don't care if it kills the planet. I don't care if we're polluting the air. I don't care if we're dumping poisons in the stream. I don't care if there's cancer clusters downwind from our refineries. We want more money. And if that was just the exact same thing, only where what was being hoarded was mansions, swimming pools, and trillions of dollars in bank accounts. And her response was, I've never known a rich person, so I don't know. My response was, I've known a few rich people, and I absolutely believe that to be the case. I think that what we are looking at, and by the way, we used to call it this. There was an op-ed in the Washington Post last week about how we used to call great wealth something to be, concerned about, right, societally. We used to view it as something that had as much of a downside as an upside. And now we just simply celebrate great wealth. And I'm convinced that there are some folks who have hoarding syndrome, but they were born wealthy. And so they applied that hoarding syndrome to what they could hoard. And it wasn't tin cans or pizza boxes or newspapers. It was money or properties, money and properties. Donald Trump has hoarded quite a few properties around the world. And, I think that, we have to recognize this as a mental illness that's capable of damaging our society. We've got massive poverty in the United States. We've got a middle class that's being devastated because, in my opinion, of the hoarding syndrome that's being exhibited by probably just a couple of dozen billionaires in this country. And the Supreme Court has empowered them to do great damage to both our economy and our body politic by certifying that their great wealth is somehow protected under the First Amendment free speech provisions. And in my opinion, the Supreme Court's totally wrong on that. But that's my theory on it, Kyle. Am I making sense?
You're making complete sense. I agree fully with that hoarding aspect, that gluttonous need to intake everything possible so as to avoid feeling, quote, hunger.
Right. Yeah.
Any of those negative emotions that we've attached.
Yeah, I think that's what's going on, and I don't know how to treat it. All I know is that historically we have had societal interventions, things like the estate tax and the top income tax rate, and in the UK, I believe they've even done a wealth tax in several other European countries that discourage hoarding of money. But we've got a serious problem with it in this country. Kyle, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Very thought-provoking topic. Connie in Reno, Nevada. Hey, Connie, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom, I just want to thank you for all of your inspiration you give us every day. And I believe next year I'm going to try and retire and run for some kind of office. I don't know what.
Good
yet,
on you.
but
That's great.
I'm going to give it a shot. And I got to tell you, one of my pet peeves, and I'm so tired of it, and I want to know your take on this, is the charity system in this country. By noon every day, I have been hit with 5 to 10 different requests, either on national news or local news or at work or on a billboard to donate. And, I'm about your age group there, and I don't remember this back in the 60s and 70s. It seems like, when we cut all the taxes for the rich, it's like that's where the money used to go in our taxes that would provide all these services.
That's right.
And every time I mention it, people just give me a dumbfounded look. And I think if we start looking at different charities and when they started, probably most of them were after 1980.
Yeah, well, and medicine didn't used to be so expensive. I mean, I remember back in the 70s running a business and paying $35 a month for full Blue Cross Blue Shield for every one of my employees. $35 per person, but still, it was cheap. You didn't go broke having a baby. We had 3 of them, and we had one at home, but still, you don't go. And everything has been privatized as a result of Reaganomics. I'm with you, Con. Thank you for the call. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of your calls, and we're going to also check in with Talk Media News and find out what's going on in the world today. Stick around. And welcome back. Mike in Boise, Idaho. Hey, Mike, what's on your mind today? Mike?
Hello?
Hey, you're on the air.
I'm not in Boise, though.
Oh, where are you?
I'm in Windsor, Ontario.
Oh, my goodness. That's quite a difference.
Yeah, that's why I wasn't responding.
Okay, Nate, he's on line 4. You might want to clean that up. He's in Windsor, Ontario. So what's on your mind, Mike?
I just wanted to follow up on that story about the Russian that kind of saved the world, because it's a fascinating story, and some of the points are a real cautionary tale at this time in the world's history. What hasn't been discussed is how that whole situation developed. What's going on was Russian submarine was shadowing the U.S. fleet blockading Cuba at the time.
Right.
And it was detected by the Americans, who wanted to force it to surface, and they started using depth charges to start the surface. Well, the Russian submarine couldn't communicate with Moscow unless it was surfaced, but it didn't want to surface because the American fleet was there.
Right.
So as time went on, and the depth charges kept going down, the Russians got panicky, and that's what triggered their desire to launch the missiles, because they figured if it's gone on this long, we must be at war by now.
So the launch was from the commander of the submarine, not from the Soviet Union itself?
Yes, exactly. And the reason was because they were being depth charged, which was preventing them from surfacing to contact Moscow.
Right. Very interesting.
So when you think of that, both sides were acting rationally in the context of their understanding of the situation.
Right.
But the results were totally irrational.
Right. Had that one sailor not refused to turn the key, there would have been a nuclear bomb coming out of a nuclear missile coming out of a Soviet submarine off the coast of the United States that would have taken out something. Who knows what it was aimed at?
I mean, I don't know what it was targeting. I never saw anything.
Presumably D.C. or New York. I mean,
it had pre-programmed codes just like the American submarines did.
Yeah. I'm not sure that that's to what extent that's an analogy for what's happening right now.
Well, just that one piece of miscommunication or one person not being being able to communicate to the right people at the right time could lead, in this highly tense situation, could lead to disaster.
Yeah. Well, and that's very much where we are with regard to North Korea right now. I mean, it's just.
It's not only North Korea, though. It's with Russia. It's with China. I mean, it's everywhere you look. Iran, the tensions have just ratcheted up so high.
Yeah, we're where the world was in 1917, it seems, which is also not reassuring. Mike, thank you for the call. A lot of countries with a lot of grievances and a lot of mutual defense treaties or agreements. We'll be back with Patrick Gavin with Talk Media News right after this. Welcome back. Let's check in with Patrick Gavin and find out what's going on in the world today with Talk Media News. This report brought to you by Ellen Ratner's new book, Loving What You Do, and goatsfortheoldgoat.com and free-don.org. Patrick, welcome back.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Sure. So what's the latest? Has the president tweeted in the last hour and a half?
I don't think he has. But it's funny, sort of looking over what's been going on in D.C., and what I want to talk with you about today. I mean, there was sort of a common theme running throughout all of it, which is, when you look at almost all these stories, be it North Korea, sort of Trump's feud with Mitch McConnell, even healthcare, and sort of the never-ending talk about what Republicans will do with that, there seems to be a common theme throughout all of them, which is that it's very hard to tell sort of how serious Trump is on these things or not, meaning how serious is he with his tough talk with North Korea, how serious is he with his tough talk with Mitch McConnell, how serious is he about actually spending more political capital on health care reform? I think that's sort of, just part and parcel with this presidency, which is that not only is there a fair deal amount of flip-flopping, but also it's just very difficult to know what this president thinks. I think in part because, he's very prone to sort of the last person who he's spoken with.
Well, there's two other things. One is that throughout his life, he's basically gotten his way in pretty much every circumstance. And when he hasn't, and when things have not worked out, his many failed businesses, for example, he declares bankruptcy, or he walks away, or he screws somebody else. His vendors, his tradesmen, things like that. And that has served him well, because he's been the richest guy around. He's always been at the center of his own universe, probably since the day he was born. And so not taking responsibility, dumping the liability and the damages on other people when things don't go the way he wants, and taking all the responsibility when the things go the way he does want, has worked for him. That won't work when you're president of the United States, or at least it won't work if you want to have a country that functions in a world that's in peace. And that's my concern.
Yeah, and I think that that really does go to the heart of the sort of feud with Mitch McConnell, which is obviously much less important than North Korea. But I think that when people sort of wonder, because it is a very head-scratching move, the fact that Trump is going after the one guy in D.C. he needs to actually enact his agenda. Right. I think part of it is sort of setting up a fall guy. I mean, Trump. I mean, all Republicans, but Trump in particular doesn't have Obama to blame anymore. Doesn't have Democrats in power to sort of blame for obstructionism. I mean, he only has his own party, and so there's a beginning. There's a start of sort of eating your own here. And I think that Trump has no legislative accomplishments to speak of so far. He's somebody who wants to be able to boast of accomplishments. One good way of deflecting responsibility for the fact that nothing's gotten done is by pinning it on Mitch McConnell, which I think, to be honest, I think to a lot of Trump's base makes sense. I mean, here's a seasoned Washington insider, a longtime Senate majority leader who's supposed to be getting things done, and he can't get things done. I think for President Trump's base, that does ring true, and it also, I think, fits in with this idea of Trump trying to cast himself as this outsider, which of course is,
But if he's trying to create a Lex Luthor so that he can be Superman, picking Mitch McConnell is problematic, because Mitch McConnell is one of the most powerful men in the world, and he's going to be around. He's very popular in Kentucky. He's not going to lose the next election because of this. He doesn't really care what Donald Trump thinks. If Trump wanted a piñata, if he wanted to have, to identify somebody as the bad guy who screwed everything up, he would be much safer to pick John McCain. John McCain has a terminal illness. John McCain is probably not going to participate in the Senate a great deal over the coming year. Although maybe John McCain is a more sympathetic figure now that he has brain cancer. But this does not seem to me like any kind of a cogent, thought out beyond a day or two strategy. I mean, he's absolutely playing checkers when he should be playing chess.
You're exactly right. I mean, it makes no sense whatsoever. I mean, we just think about the fact that going into September, Congress needs to raise the debt ceiling. They need to pass a budget. They need to fund the government.
And it all has to get past Mitch McConnell.
Yeah, exactly. And so to go after that guy is just highly bizarre. I mean, I think to your point about John McCain, the pessimist in me says just give that time. He will eventually.
Yeah, I think you're right. But see, this raises another question, Patrick, and that is if this guy is, fill in the blank for the word. Stupid or crazy are not the appropriate words, and I'm not sure what they are, what the appropriate word is. But if this guy is, whatever it is, enough that he's going to attack the one of the most powerful Republicans in America, who he desperately needs to advance his legislative agenda, if he's crazy enough to do that, is he crazy enough to start a nuclear war with Kim Jong-un?
That's a great question, and it's a terrifying one. And I think that Trump has always sort of fancied himself as kind of a tough military leader, and he's always sort of mentioned how people view him as a general. And I think that it's almost been a fantasy of him to sort of play that role, and that's why this becomes quite scary. To say nothing of the fact that I'm sure the fallout from military conflict, which tends to be higher presidential approval ratings, is a fact not lost on the president. Right. I have to hope, and given the benefit of the doubt, that he wouldn't do that for those reasons. But I think that that's an area in which he's a lot more comfortable. It really concerns me. I mean,
the fact that he thought the coolest thing about General Mattis was that his nickname was Mad Dog. Remember? And Mattis kept saying, no, don't call me that, It's like, here's Mad Dog Mattis, And he views himself as Douglas MacArthur. Well, Douglas MacArthur got fired by Eisenhower, It was like, it was just because somebody knows how to kill people doesn't mean, or how to run I don't know. I'm blithering here, but it concerns me. What else is going on in the world, Patrick?
Well, I think that one of the things that's going on is that, which I sort of alluded to earlier, which is the not ending attempt to repeal and replace Obamacare. The conservative House Freedom Caucus is now trying to force Paul Ryan to bring up what's being called as clean Obamacare repeal. It sort of repeals Obamacare after a 2-year transition period. They're trying to ramp up support to get a lot of outside groups, a lot of grassroots conservative organizations to put pressure on not only moderate Republicans but also the White House as well. I continue to think that any effort to sort of resuscitate, repeal, and replace will be dead upon arrival for a number of reasons. One, I think Mitch McConnell still has egg on his face, and he would like to wipe that off before moving forward. Ditto Trump, who I think, despite whatever quirky qualities he has, does know that he needs a legislative victory, and he has a much better chance with that on tax reform than spending more political capital on repealing and replacing Obamacare. And there's just, the fact of the matter is that Obamacare continues to get more popular. Republican efforts to repeal and replace it continue to be more confusing and unpopular. And it's one of these things where even Republicans around the country are not overwhelmingly in favor of the Republicans' own plan. So, this is one of these things where you want to caution, I think, readers and viewers and listeners that despite all the headlines, at least in my experience, I think it's a safe bet to say that repeal and replace is not going to happen.
Yeah, I think you're right. Patrick Gavin with Talk Media News. Thank you, Patrick.
You bet.
We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com. Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit tomsbeets.com.
I'm Nina Turner, and you're watching Free Speech TV.
This woman is saying some really cool stuff. M-U-S-C-A-T-O, Danielle Moscato. She says, this is to Donald Trump in response to his tweeting about Saturday Night Live, right? She said, do you know how many children went to bed tonight without enough food to eat? Do you even care? What is wrong with you? No, of course you don't know these things. You don't even know what a blind trust is, and you call yourself a businessman. You're pathetic. You ran for president for attention. You're a fake, a fraud. You never wanted to win anyway. We can all see it. You're not fooling anyone. You're scared and overwhelmed, and you have absolutely no idea what you're doing, and it shows. You think you're all that we're all too polite, too aghast to call you out. I see through you, Donnie. I'm calling you out. You're a joke. With every fiber of my being, I'm disgusted by you. And you know what the real secret is? You're disgusted by you too, she's saying to Donald Trump. That's why you surround yourself with gold and beautiful women that you objectify. You know you're a loser, so you try to make yourself feel better, feel successful, authoritative with things, money. You're an imposter. You're a fraud. I'm ashamed of you. The world is ashamed. You spout nonsense. Millions of illegal voters, even you don't believe it. It's absurd. You think we're stupid? You think we don't know what you're doing? Trying to control the narrative, get your followers to distrust the media, the polls, news reporters, so that they must turn to you for what's true, what's real? There's a name for that. It's called propaganda. We know what you're doing. We will not allow you to suppress votes with this nonsense. We will not allow you to trample our civil rights. We will not allow you to destroy the progress we've made. We will resist. I call upon progressives, Democrats, independents, and Republicans to resist, hashtag resist fascism, resist Donald Trump, resist crony capitalism, resist hypocrisy. When Donald Trump lies, acknowledge and call it out as propaganda. When he tests boundaries, acknowledge and call it out as fascism. Resist. We cannot wait and see. Real Donald Trump is telling us here and now what he's going to do. Believe him. Millions of illegal votes is not a claim about reality, despite what Donald Trump's pretense. It is a warning, a threat. Pay attention. Resist. Donald Trump is telling us he'll suppress our votes. Our democracy is at stake. We cannot wait, let him enact policy, then whine. We must resist. Donald Trump tweets so that we forget that his kids will run a company in a so-called blind trust while sitting in on diplomatic meetings. Trump tweets so we forget that he's stacking his cabinets with the very same people he proposed to remove from his influence. Trump tweets so we ignore that he's clueless at governance. The more outrageous his tweets, the harder it is for us to keep up. We see you, Donald. We know exactly what you're doing. It's not working on us. You're a disgrace and you should be ashamed. The next 4 years will be brutal for me and my fellow civil rights activists. Not all of us will survive, but we will resist. We will resist Donald Trump till racist police are imprisoned. We will resist till full equality for women. We will resist. We are ready. We will resist until abortion is accessible to everyone who needs it, until LGBTQ are safe and healthy, until people of color are safe. Donald Trump, you can fight us on it, and you are and you will, but you will lose because history is on our side. We may not live to see it, but we know we will win. We will fight you every step, so be ready. You can't stop progress no matter how hard you try. I hear in her voice the echo of Sophie Scholl, who, along with her brother, started in Nazi Germany in the 40s, the White Rose Society, which was the resistance movement against Hitler, the student resistance movement against Hitler. Memories.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Some stories in the news that I think are worthy of sharing, ranting, riffing, whatever. This is by Mark Hand. It's over at Think Progress. Top utilities are spending a lot of money to elect Republican governors. Now, ask yourself, why would a utility, a company that manufactures electricity and sells it to customers, why would they care what party the governor is from? Why would it turn out that they're giving a pile of money to the Republican Governors Association and to Republican candidates for governorships rather than Democrats? Why would private for-profit utilities be doing this? Well, as Mark Hand writes, governors can have a significant impact on the activities of utility companies in their states, whether it's appointing members to state regulators, commissions, or developing energy policy. Most recently, Republican governors in Maine and Indiana would be Mike Pence, by the way, playing important roles in impeding the growth of clean energy in their states. In Indiana, this was Pence's successor, but Pence was all over this too. In Indiana, Governor Eric Holcomb signed a bill that shreds incentives for rooftop solar, delivering a blow to solar installers and their customers. In Maine, lawmakers failed to override Governor Paul LePage's veto of a solar bill aimed at boosting rooftop solar growth. The actions by the Republican governors were supported by the utilities, the electric utilities in their states. There are 2 gubernatorial elections in 2017, 36 of them coming up next year in 2018. 26 of these seats are currently held by Republicans. With West Virginia's Jim Justice recently switching to the Republican Party, the GOP now holds 34 governorships, an all-time high. And then they talk about how this is a big thing. The utilities really don't want Democrats in office, because Democrats might support things like you're having solar panels on your home and saving a pile of money on your electric bill and making the world a cleaner and safer place. All things that are anathema to Republicans. Republicans want you to pay the highest electric bill possible because they're getting kickbacks from the utilities. Republicans, don't care if the air is dirty and people are poisoned. Their billionaire donors can live in air-conditioned 30-bedroom mansions. Republicans don't care about the state of democracy in your state. They just want control because they want the money, which goes to the power. In its report, utilitysecrets.org found that electric utilities, their affiliated companies, and their executives contributed a total of $1.154 million to the Republican Governors Association just in the first 6 months of this year. $1.154 million. How much money did they give to the Democrats? $286,000. Less than a quarter. 15 companies surveyed by utilitysecrets.org contributed money only to the Republican Governors Association. 5 companies or associations, Dominion Energy, PSEG Services, Southern Company, Xcel Energy, and the Edison Electric Institute, which is the main trade association for the electric industry, contributed money to both Republicans and Democratic governor associations. Only one utility contributed solely to Democrats. That was Puget Sound Electric. Blah-de-blah-de-blah. Utilities also donated $271,000 to the Republican Attorneys General's Association, only $65,000 to the Democrats. Pretty transparent what's going on here. Pretty straightforward. I mentioned the 1% is organized and coming for its tax cuts. Is the resistance ready? The headline of the article by Andrea Germanos, staff writer over at commondreams.org, launched Wednesday. This is the American Action Network, which is basically a Paul Ryan group, is spending $2.5 million on television ads that say, quote, America's tax code is sabotaging our country, end quote. This is one of many right-wing groups, basically all funded by hoarding billionaires. Indeed, Andrea writes, indeed, the ad comes amidst promotional efforts by Koch brothers-affiliated groups to bolster the Republican tax cut endeavor, including an ad blitz of their own and a lineup of events in 36 states. There's also a more stealth effort underway far closer to the Oval Office. According to a new report by Bloomberg, the White House has taken a page from the George W. Bush's administration's by gathering a red team to strategize a successful tax rewrite. They're calling this a tightly orchestrated process, all hands on deck. The members of this red team gathering, led by White House Director of Legislative Affairs Mark Short, include representatives from major power centers: the Office of American Innovation, led by Jared Kushner; Treasury Department, led by Secretary Steve Mnuchin; Vice President Mike Pence's staff, and Gary Cohn's National Economic Council. So they are pulling out the big guns. And as Indivisible says in pushing back, here's the first thing to know: this is not going to be true tax reform. Calling it tax reform suggests they intend to close corporate loopholes or address the growing wealth inequality that the current tax code fuels. But that's not what Republicans have in mind. Instead, they want tax cuts for the wealthy and tax cuts for corporations paid for by taking away Medicare, Medicaid, and education funding. Since they want to pass their tax cut plan through the Senate with only 51 votes, they have to follow the rules of reconciliation. You know, blah-de-blah goes through that. Meaning that in order to make their tax cuts for the wealthy permanent, they have to have deep cuts to entitlements. So this is the next big project. Right? I think the whole Trump care thing is dead, although never say never. We're talking vampires here. But it sure looks like, you know, this is the direction things are going. By the way, did you know that the tech sector accounts for 23% of the Standard & Poor's 500 value? This is from the Lex column in the Financial Times. It went from around 2 or 3%, barely a blip 10 years ago. The sector now approaches 8% of the value of the U.S. corporate bond index. In other words, high-tech companies in Silicon Valley have borrowed more money than people have borrowed in the field of consumer goods, real estate, or retail, and retail. Tech accounted for 3% of issuance in 2004, $10 billion. Now it's $100 billion in bonds that they're issuing. They're borrowing money. They hit 20% of corporate issuance for the first time. In other words, there's a bubble forming, and it's forming around the tech stocks and the tech companies. And the Financial Times is a little concerned about this. Have you looked at the VIX lately? Oh, and finally, just the headline is enough. Indiana Republicans keep blocking early voting in a major Democratic county. Meanwhile, a Republican-friendly county has no problem with expanding early voting. Yeah, Indiana, Mike Pence country. It's so good. We'll be back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Back with your calls, my thoughts, and the news of the day after this. And welcome back. Jeff in San Francisco. Hey, Jeff, what's on your mind?
I just want to give a shout out to your listeners to read Ellen Brown's Web of Debt and push for public banking in your states and cities.
Yeah, it's a brilliant book, and she has a website of the same title, webofdebt.com, which is also brilliant. I agree with you.
Yeah, Seattle's trying to get it through. California has, Arizona. I mean, red states even.
Yeah,
and it's going to be modeled after North Dakota,
right? Which has had a state-owned bank since what, 1909?
13, I believe. Or
19,
like
yeah, 1913.
Or 1990, whatever.
Yeah,
pretty a long time. But one thing I would like to have them to read is page 448 says the pieces of the monetary puzzle have been concealed by layers of deception built up over 400 years. And I know you don't kind of believe me in this, but I really believe this has been going on a long time. And people do have the power to take this back through public banking, all the money we pay in interest and fees and the such, and with the fractional reserve system. So
yeah, I don't disagree. I think banking has been run both ethically and as a scam for millennia.
Well,
as far as banking has been around.
We could follow Japan's model of economics in the late 80s before the IMF came in and wrecked it. It was kind of like our Defense Department, where we had the money, we gave it to the defense, and they built, but instead they would give it to Toyota and all their, companies. It was actually, it was entrepreneurialism or capitalism, however you want to say it, but it was state-run, and it had, it wasn't like, socialism. And that's what our founding fathers were kind of believed in. It was kind of a commonwealth. They believed in, a form of social security, economic growth, universal education.
John Adams signed the first, national health care bill. I mean, it only applied to sailors, but it was the first government will pay for your health insurance.
Well,
your health care.
Kind of like Pennsylvania had a type of public banking. Ben Franklin back, I think in the 60s, whenever he was around the 1700s, and the British, that was one thing that scared him because this worked so well, and I believe the British banks came and tried to, I think they eventually did, wreck this. That's where I kind of disagree with you as far as you think we should always have a national debt. I don't know.
The national debt doesn't have anything to do with the banking system. Treasury Department is not the same thing as the Fed.
Could you explain that?
Sure.
So,
the Constitution gives the federal government the right to mint coins. It does not give the federal government the right to print money, and it's a weird thing of language that's in the Constitution, but it has been interpreted over the years to literally mean what I just said. So if you have, nickels, pennies, quarters, dimes in your pocket, those are actual U.S. currency printed by the U.S. Mint and owned by the U.S. Treasury. If you have dollar bills in your pocket, those represent numbers on a balance sheet held by the Federal Reserve and have nothing to do with the Treasury Department. So once you get that, that there's basically two different kinds of currency in the United States, then you have to start looking at, okay, what's the Fed's role versus the Treasury's role, and how has that changed since the founding of the Republic? Jeff, I got to run. Thanks for the call.
Hi, I'm Valerie with Free Speech TV. We're proud to provide you with independent, unfiltered news and documentaries. And as our valued viewer, you can help us continue bringing Free Speech TV well into the future. Join our Pearly Gate Rebels, our planned giving program. Your gift of any size will help ensure democracy endures through an informed citizenry. You can donate property, money, or assets. It's easy. My spouse and I are proud Pearly Gate Rebels. We're doing our part to ensure that Free Speech TV will be here to deliver thought-provoking news and information well into the future. Join us. Call 877-378-8669 or email me at valerie@freespeech.org. Rebel against media owned by billionaires and become one of our Pearly Gate Rebels today.
Welcome back. Janice in American Falls, Idaho. Hey, Janice, what's on your mind today?
Hello. Hi. It's really hard to follow you because the phone and the TV don't coincide right now.
Yeah, and we're having a problem today. We've got some sort of a technical problem in delivering our show to Free Speech TV. So on the Free Speech TV side, they're actually playing yesterday's show. So, but anyhow, let's talk about whatever you want to talk about, Janice.
Well, I was hoping that between you and me and all of the viewers, we could contact the Democrats in our state capital to nominate Al Gore and Bernie Sanders for the 2020 election because they are already trusted. They're all well known. They've already had the votes. And, you know, Trump is already campaigning, and we need to get somebody out there ahead of the game.
Yeah. I'm skeptical that Al Gore has any interest in running for political office again. I spoke with him, it's been 6 years, 7 years, maybe 8 years ago, but he at that point in time was clearly just fried by the political process. And I introduced his speech in Portland, and we spent some time together. And Bernie, we'll see what Bernie's going to do. But right now, he's very focused on being an effective United States senator. I think that there are a number of good potential candidates on the Democratic side, and a number of them are getting, basically doing the things that you do before you run for president. You write a book, you start raising your public profile, you get out there. I see Elizabeth Warren doing this. I see Kamala Harris doing this. I see Cory Booker doing this. There's a number of people who are potential Democratic nominees or Democratic contenders for the White House. And I think it's going to be a real interesting 2018. We're seeing Democrats all over the country who are stepping up and saying, I'm going to run in races that never have even been contested because everybody just assumed the Republicans would win. So
my thinking was that Al Gore and Bernie Sanders already have the will of the people behind them. They're well known. They've already been voted for.
Yeah, I don't disagree, but times change, people change, and neither one of them are. Well, I can't speak to Bernie. Bernie has kind of left it in the open in the air, but well, we'll see. Janice, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Jimmy in Arkadelphia, Arkansas. Hey, Jimmy, what's on your mind?
Yes, Tom, how are you?
I'm well.
The question I have is that with the situation with North Korea going on, Russia, it's in their neighborhood. If there's a war, they're going to have some effects from it. And why aren't they speaking out more?
Well, it's in China's neighborhood. I think the southern Russian border with the northern Chinese border has to be hundreds, if not more than 1,000 miles away from North Korea.
It's that far. Well,
yeah.
I thought it was closer, but still, that's on their side of the world. Our side of the world is way, what is it, 6,000 miles away or more?
Yeah, other than Guam and our allies, South Korea and Japan and Taiwan.
But why haven't they even spoken up about this situation?
Who's they?
I just don't understand.
Why hasn't who spoken up about it?
I'm sorry, Russia. Why hasn't Russia spoken up about it?
I think every country in the world is looking at this verbal testosterone match between Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un and going, holy cow, I don't want to go near that. If I was, any government, Russian government, the Chinese just came out and said, because North Korea is basically a client state to the Chinese. The Chinese came out and said to Kim, if you attack the United States, we will not defend you. And they said to us, if you attack North Korea first, you're declaring war on us too. And so the Chinese have drawn a very clear line here. And let's hope that if nothing else, that restrains Donald Trump, because this is getting wacky. Jimmy, thanks for the call. Abraham in Escondido, California. Hey, Abraham, what's up?
Hey, first-time caller.
Thank you.
Okay, so I wanted to ask you about the 4 missiles that North Korea says they want to shoot towards Guam. It's interesting. It almost sounds like a test of our anti-missile system. Nobody knows if we're going to use it or not. Clearly, if they're shooting as far as Guam, if the thing went, 30 extra miles, it would hit U.S. territory. So we're sort of obligated to try and shoot them down where we haven't been in the past.
Right.
And shooting a single missile obviously isn't much of a test. You could miss one or hit one. But, 3 out of 4, 4 out of 4, 1 out of 4, that gives them really good information for whatever they do next.
Well, it's a huge risk for Trump, because if he chooses to shoot down the 4 North Korean missiles, let's assume that they actually shoot them, which I think is up in the air right now. I'm guessing that Kim is starting to get a little rattled too. But if they shoot them and he tries to take them out, and we only take, and we don't successfully intercept all 4 of them, you're right. It's a giant experiment, and not just for Kim, but for every other country in the world that might have an adversarial relationship with the United States that may someday involve missiles. And you know, our anti-ballistic missile technology, you know, while our defense contractors, as Medea Benjamin was talking about in the second hour of the program, you know, Lockheed Martin and the other defense contractors are like, hey, everything's great. This thing works all the time. Just super. Well, yeah, it works all the time on a clear day in California on a test range when you know when the missile's going off. But, you know, they've, to the best of my knowledge, these things have never been tried in real time, in real combat situations, or in this case, even, you know, a real world situation that doesn't involve combat, but that does involve actual live missiles. And so, you know, I don't know what the level of confidence that Trump and his generals have in the THAAD system is, but if it's not 100%, they would be, I would think they would be advised not, you know, just to let Kim do it, get it out of his system, and just move along, and let's start, you know, working very closely with the Chinese to try to change this, or take Kim's offer. You know, he said, if you stop the war games off my coast every year, or twice a year, I'll stop developing missiles. I'll stop shooting off missiles and testing nukes. A freeze for a freeze. That sounds reasonable. Anyhow, Abraham, thanks for the call. We will be back. It's coming up on 28 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with more of your calls right after this. Welcome to the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. We're reading from Death in the Pines, a novel set in Vermont. You have to be crazy to do this. On a morning when the Vermont winter sun shone pale and weak across 6 crisp inches of fresh snow, when the temperature hovered somewhere between 20 and 25 degrees Fahrenheit, I spent a long time searching for 10 stones. They had to be the right stones, of a certain weight and shape, heavy but not so heavy they exhausted me, rounded but not so much that they would roll from the place I set them. It took 5 hours to find all 10 of them, searching in the sheltered places where the dry, powdery snow was easier to scrape aside. But then they had to be lugged to the spot I had selected, mindless beast of burden work that made me sweat inside my downline jacket. I stacked the stones carefully into a hollow, truncated pyramid. Anyone coming across that pile of stones in 10 or 100 years would know they weren't dropped there haphazardly by a retreating glacier. This was a made thing, too small to be a cairn, too insignificant to be the remnants of a wall. I guess you could call it an altar. The ashes were in a bronze urn, far too small to contain the spirit of my friend John Lincoln. The container had stood on the shelf in my cabin for too many months. The new year had just arrived, and with it a belated first snowfall of the season, and the combination of the two had finally persuaded me it was time to do something about the urn. Holding it in the chill, near silence of the forest, I stood over the structure I'd made and looked off into the distance, seeing but not seeing the brownish shafts of pines streaked with snow, the bare gray trunks of maples, the white and gray columns of birch, the deep shaded greens of white burdened firs. At that moment, the urn felt heavier than the stones themselves. This was why I was here. The mind drifts at such times. Even after 6 years, I could recall the particular night that had caused me to travel to this place. On that night, my mentor, no, by that time my friend, John and I had been slumped in the rotting front seat of an ancient rusting 55 Ford, parked in the heavy, humid midnight of Central America. Despite the choking reek of insect repellent, voracious mosquitoes whined in through the open windows, and from time to time we slapped an offender, reducing it to a crumble of tissue to be flicked off with a fingertip. Still warmer than blood heat even at that hour. The dark air sizzled with cicadas. We had left our home base in Atlanta a week before and had taken a circuitous route to this dark clearing hacked from the jungle. We were waiting for either 3 or 4 men to emerge from a blacked-out warehouse, and we had no idea whether those men knew we were watching or how well they might be armed. What we would do depended on how many came out. If only 3, we'd move in and recover what had been stolen. 4 would make the recovery problematic, because that would mean that at least one of the men would be a local, complicating the calculus of violence. As I stood over the stone altar, every detail of our conversation went through my mind. A tape rewound and replayed. By that point in our lives, John and I had been partners for so long that we didn't BS each other, had no need to strain for machismo, no use for phony heartiness. We were a good team. We could finish each other's sentences, catch body language signals that amounted to a silent code, recognize unspoken concerns and anxieties in time to be prepared for the unexpected. We told all our jokes to each other years before. Once in a while, one of us might mutter 2 or 3 words of a punchline. The other would chuckle in appreciation or exasperation as the mood took him. That night in stop and start fashion, we had each spoke of good times we'd had. Waiting in the dark gave each of us a natural urge to talk. That was the one and only time that John had spoken of his quiet way in the forested hills of Vermont, thinking of the coolness of a New England autumn in that hellish tropic night. I'd never known that he'd been to Vermont. He had lived in Buckhead, a suburb of Atlanta, the whole time I'd known and worked with him. But in those suffocating hours of darkness, cool green Vermont was on his mind. Beautiful place, very peaceful, he said. I'd like to go back there when it's all over. I didn't have time to ask what he meant or what would be over. The job, the summer, the career, the life. At that moment, dim yellow light from a kerosene lantern appeared on the black face of the warehouse. First a line, then a thin rectangle, then a fat square as the 3 men inside pushed open the double doors. John and I climbed out of our borrowed car and did our job. In the 6 years that followed that night, John never had gone back to Vermont, had never spoken of it again. And now for him, it really was all over. After the memorial service, after the will was probated, I didn't feel like hanging around Atlanta. So I made arrangements, gave most of my liquid assets to a community for abused kids in New Hampshire, and bought a cabin on 200 acres in the woods of Vermont. It was here I'd brought my old friend to the place he'd talked about. Pondering the finality of it all, I held the urn containing his ashes, a few bone fragments and pieces of his teeth, ready to fulfill a promise I had never made. Such a time demands words. I took a deep breath of icy air and looked up toward the top of a towering birch. A squirrel made an untidy, tangled nest up there in the highest branches, and the animal itself, or maybe another squirrel, who could tell, hung below the nest, head down in the trunk, apparently gazing at me. I imagined the squirrel's bright black eye held accusation. The fall had gone on so long, probably for half the animal's lifetime. So what was the idea of all this snow? Was I to blame? Clearing my throat, I reached far back into memory, groping for the prayers I had last recited as a child. I heard myself say, "Dear God." My words took flight toward the washed-out sky on puffs of vapor. As far as I could tell, no one heard them but me and the squirrel. My voice had a harsh tone even to my own ears, a rusty hinge catch. The book is Death in the Pines. It's an Oakley Tyler novel based in Vermont. Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Here with you. So happy to have you with us. William in Bloomington, Indiana. Hey, William, what's up?
Hey, Tom, how you doing? My first time calling your show.
Well, thank you. Thanks for listening on Sirius XM, too. What's on your mind?
Hey, well, I wanted to say I'm a retired veteran Marine Corps, and I served under and worked for General Mattis.
Okay.
And do you remember maybe about a little more than a month ago, Donald Trump had a meeting with his cabinet and his staffers, and they all took turns going around the horn, kissing his ring and saying how happy they were to wash his feet, so on and so forth. When it got to General Mattis, he was the only one that didn't do that.
That's right.
And what he did was to praise the troops.
Yep, I remember it well.
Serving. Yeah. And from my knowledge of General Mattis, the guy he's hard, but he's fair. His priorities were the mission and then the troops in that order. Of course, the mission is all-encompassing, but that's how he worked. And one more comment I wanted to make. If this guy, he seems to present himself as the wise adult among all of Donald Trump's inner circle. Mm-hmm. And if he continues to do that, I wouldn't be the least bit surprised that as Trump's regime starts to disintegrate, that they start calling for General Mattis to run for president. What do you think? I don't think he's well known enough. And I think that he's tainted by Trump. So I'd be very surprised if that happened. But if you've served with him and you have a high opinion of him,
you're not alone. I mean, there's a lot of people who have known him and members of Congress who voted to confirm him who have a very, very high opinion of him. So, you know, hopefully he can be the adult in the room for Donald Trump. But so far, I don't know. I don't know. You think?
Thanks again for taking my call.
You're welcome. Thank you, William. Thank you for the call. Matthew in Smithfield, North Carolina. Hey, Matthew, what's on your mind today?
Hey, happy Friday, Dr. Tom.
Thank you.
I'll tell you what, the people, I'm an insurance broker. I know the insurance business, why it's happening the way it's happening. We've been containing costs, but premiums are going crazy because single payer is the reality of a non-capitalistic, beastly system of delivering medicine. But the Republicans I work with are just so unhinged they can't even talk confidently about that. But my point was, the reason I called was this. I think there is one person who can temper all of this malfeasance in electoral politics, and that's Eliot Spitzer. And the reason that I bring Eliot out is because of his ability to fight against what is the most corruptive element in our politics, and that is the money. And I just wanted to see what you thought about that, Tom.
I agree with you, Matthew. I'm a big fan of Eliot Spitzer. If you've ever watched the movie Client Number 9, which is a documentary about how one of the billionaires and their buddies, Roger Stone, who are backing Donald Trump, took down Eliot Spitzer and, according to the movie, committed several federal felonies in the process. Spitzer was being groomed to be president. He would have been the next FDR. He was talking like FDR. He was following the same career path as FDR. Not the same, but, you know, close, through New York politics, New York State politics, New York City politics. And he was a hell of a prosecutor and had the potential to be a hell of a governor. And I think he could have gone from New York governor to president of the United States. Unfortunately, you know, he had a thing going with a hooker, and, you know, it just doesn't work to become president. But take a close look at Eric Schneiderman. Eric Schneiderman is the guy who is now the New York, the Attorney General, the State Attorney General for the state of New York, who is exercising some considerable oversight over Wall Street. And I think he's got a lot of these billionaires running scared. I'm very, very impressed by Eric Schneiderman. So I doubt Spitzer has much of a political career, at least on a national stage, because his name has been so badly slandered by the events and by the Republicans exploiting those events. But I think Schneiderman has it. Matthew, thanks for the call. Peggy in Odessa, Missouri. Hey, Peggy, what's on your mind today?
Hi. I stumbled across your show a couple of months ago, and now it's my favorite show.
Oh, thank you, Peggy.
And, of course, this is the first time I've ever called.
Thank you.
I just have a question. I never hear anything about the First Lady. Is there anything going on, anything that you know about her? I read something where she's highly intelligent. I don't know if that's true or not, but we never hear from her.
I have a feeling Melania Trump is a very smart woman. I don't know her. I don't know anybody who knows her, so I can't speak, you know, about her at a personal level. What I do know is that one magazine wrote, or one writer for some magazine or some online website or whatever, wrote an article suggesting that she had come to the United States as basically a high-priced call girl. That there was basically no evidence for that. And based on the fact, and I say fact because I believe this has been adjudicated by a court of law, the fact that there was no evidence for that claim, Melania Trump and her lawyers sued this guy and just wiped him out. And that may well be why you don't see much other press coverage of Melania, because if you say something about her that's not absolutely accurate, you'll get sued. And it's why I'm being very careful with what I say. But my sense of it is that she's a very smart woman, and she knows what she wants, and she's in the process of getting it. And I'm not sure that what she wanted was to be the First Lady of the United States, but who knows? You know, I wish that she had the ability to moderate her husband's behavior. That's the one thing that I've not been seeing any evidence of that I wish I could. Not unlike Nancy Reagan. Nancy Reagan really took Ronnie in hand. She dictated when his meetings were going to be. Of course, much of this was coming from her astrologer, but nonetheless, it was a collaboration. Bill and Hillary Clinton, a collaboration to a large extent. Jimmy Carter, even, Roseanne? No, what's his wife's name? Rosalind Carter. Thank you, Chris. They were partnerships. I don't see the evidence of that with Melania, which seems kind of sad, but, Donald Trump is a unique personality, at least in my lifetime in the White House. Peggy, I got to move along, but thank you for the call, and thanks for your kind words. It's great to hear from you. Lori in how do you say that in Florida?
Astatula.
Astatula. What a great name. So what's up, Lori?
Well, a couple things. I love your show, and I've been listening for years. I can't even tell you how long, because it's been that long.
Thank you.
And I had a question, a couple things. I have been saying for years that billionaires have a hoarding disorder. I have a master's degree in social work, and my husband's a psychiatrist. And we're both, we both believe that. And secondly, I have a question for you about when we sent the nuclear attack on Japan, how did people feel about that in this country? Because I'm guessing Republicans really wouldn't care if we did it again. But I don't know how people felt then. I mean, I know it was a different time and we were trying to stop a war.
We were in the middle of a war, and it was a declared war. It was the last declared war that the United States has had. So it was all hands on deck, absolutely everybody on board, fill in the cliche. And, I think there was broad support for Truman bombing the Japanese. And what dissent there was, people were, finding themselves in, being attacked if they expressed that dissent. I think the times are so radically different, Lori, that it's almost impossible to make a comparison. With regard to your hoarding thing, if you read some of the really, really good cultural anthropologists who chronicled the lives of Native American communities, and in some cases, there's a brilliant book about Aboriginal Australian Aborigines, that it's been at least a decade or more since I've read, and I'm sorry I can't recall the title or the author, but it was just a brilliant book that essentially said the same thing. And then I've read, some of Stephen, what's his last name? In any case, some other works about African tribes. And the one thing that was common among Native American tribes, African tribes, and Aboriginal people in Australia was that when someone in the community began hoarding, keeping things that should have been community property, that person was identified as being mentally ill, and an intervention was performed. And I think, it's time for a national intervention. Am I making sense, Lori?
I totally agree, because I'm over it.
Yeah. Welcome to the club. Lori, thanks a lot for the call. And thanks for listening to Sirius XM all these years. I do appreciate it. The hoarding, this is, and it's not everybody who's rich. It's not even probably most people who are rich. It's the people who are just, for whom riches is the only thing that matters. That's not healthy. We'll be back coming up on 15 minutes.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
More of your calls right after this. And welcome back. Cynthia, watching us on Free Speech TV in Rock Hill, South Carolina. Hey, Cynthia, what's up?
Hi. First of all, I just discovered your talk show today at a friend's house in North Carolina. And golly, I'm so glad to hear that this kind of voice is still available for America. What I wanted to mention in specific and wanted your opinion on is, are only those of us who are older now and educated with wonderful public education and then beyond, but really solid public education. How many of us remember that the only oath the president takes is to the United States Constitution and her spirit?
Her spirit? Is that language in there?
That's the truth. Yeah. In other words, the Constitution. Well, I happen to be a bit on the liberal side, but the spirit of the Constitution, which of course means the intent, as well as its ongoing nature. It's not a dead document; it's a living document.
Yeah, I agree.
Oh God, Tom, thank you. I've never had anybody agree with me on that. But as we move forward, or hope to move forward, we've had our aspirations before us for a long time, at least as a nation. We have, just with the preamble to the Constitution, that one long sentence. It's not for prosperity, it's to the posterity, liberty to those who come after us. I think people confuse the word prosperity with posterity.
Yeah.
That we preserve liberty to ourselves and those who come after us, the common good, the general welfare, the domestic tranquility, and the common defense.
Right, and establish justice.
Common defense. That is a beautiful long sentence. Do you think the current holder of the White House, which is the office of the people, the only office that is to represent each and every one of us, do you think he has any idea of what even the first sentence of the Constitution?
I don't think Trump has any. I would be astonished if he'd ever read the Constitution, at least in a way that led to comprehension.
Oh my God! I mean, see, in the way it's not a dead document to me, and you'll probably agree, is originally women didn't vote, blacks didn't have their freedom. I mean, and there are many other things we hope to address in terms of what's beneficial for humankind. But we have a basis there in the Constitution to move forward, not backwards.
I agree.
With rights to people. And when I hear a phrase like, certain things as being self-evident, my whole chest just fills up. Do you know what I mean when I say that? This we hold to be self-evident. I mean, you don't have to be a brain surgeon.
Yeah, that's from the Declaration, not the Constitution. But yes, I agree.
From the Declaration, thank you. Yes, you're quite correct on that. But I just wish that everybody who represents us, and I want them to be reminded very respectfully that they are our esteemed public servants.
Right. Yep.
That's a big part of the job.
Very well said, Cynthia. We're hitting a break here. I've got to move along. But thank you for the call and thank you for your kind words. And yes, I totally agree. And the preamble of the Constitution is something that everybody should memorize. I mean, back in the days when we had actual civics classes, I memorized it when I was in 4th grade. We all should. Cynthia, thank you for the call. We'll be right back. Hey, thanks so much to our show director, Louise Hartman, to my executive producer, Sean Taylor, to our video director, Chris Mendelis, to our radio and TV producer, Troy Miller, our phone screener, Nate Atwell, to our writer-researcher, Nate Sweet, to our webmasters, Nigel Peacock and Jamie Holly, to our business manager, Ron Hartenbaum, every one of the various groups that syndicate this program, Digital Media, Pacifica Radio, Sirius XM Satellite Radio, Cable Radio Network, Free Speech TV on Dish, Direct, and all the cable providers that carry our show, including Manhattan Neighborhood Network, to the Progressive Voices channel on TuneIn, to Netroots Radio, to our newsletter editor, Sue Nethercutt, and the folks in our chat room. Hey, how you doing? To Alan Ratner, Victoria Jones, Bob Nane, everyone at Talk Media News, to Jay Goodman-Tamboli for tech support, to our affiliates, our sponsors, and to you for supporting our program, and also our Patreon subscribers and helpers. And thank you. Thank you so much. By the way, somebody called earlier and said Russia has a border with North Korea, and I said, no, they don't. It's 1,000 miles away. I was wrong. Vladivostok is, or Vladivostok, however you say it. I've never been there. Vladivostok is not far from North Korea. Sue points out to me and gives me a map. There is a short border. The 17 kilometers, 11-mile border. It's interesting. I somehow, we all need to study geography. Kurt in Los Angeles. Hey, Kurt, what's on your mind today?
Well, Tom, I just wanted to quickly remind you that most of the Tea Party and your Republican followers of the 45th resident of the White House were all doomsday preppers between 2008 2016. They claimed that President Obama was going to take their guns, so they were building their little bomb shelters, food shelters, and hoarding food and making hydroponic gardens and koi fish and all that stuff. Well, I don't think that they're too worried about this guy starting a war or devolving into a civil war, because they pretty much have been prepping for this for 10 years.
Yeah. I think that a lot of that prepping was not waiting for a nuclear war. It was, waiting for those evil liberals to come take your guns. But I get your point. And, it was
a ruse, though, Tom.
Say what?
They knew this day was coming. I told you, these Klansmen been trying to get a white supremacist in the White House ever since Byrd and the other guy.
Well, ever since Nixon shouted out to them.
In the Klan. Huh?
I said ever since Nixon shouted out to them. I mean, the two big shout-outs to the racists were Woodrow Wilson and Richard Nixon, a Democrat and a Republican. And it continues to this day. But yeah, your point is well taken, Kurt. It's well taken. Thank you for the call. Michael in Spokane, Washington. Hey, Michael, what's up?
Yeah, I was hoping that people would call in and discuss this problem with Washington, D.C. and the foreign policy, because you had mentioned a book called Screwed.
Right.
And
I wrote a book called Screwed, if that's what you're talking about.
Pardon?
You're talking about the book that I wrote?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
And the lady who called in about the hoarding, we had a hoarding problem resolution in the Eisenhower days when the tax money was recirculated, so excessive profits would be put back into circulation.
Right.
But today it seems that Washington, D.C. is all foreign policy. It's all about going and getting other countries and getting the profits and hoarding everything. And I don't think they want to spend any dime on the rest of the country. They don't want to improve it. They want to fix it. They want all the money. What do you think?
I agree. And I think that the reason why all the media is talking about, Korea and foreign policy, blah, 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 is that our corporate profit-driven media nowadays basically no longer talks about issues. You're not going to hear an intelligent conversation about net neutrality. You're not going to hear a debate about whether AT&T should merge with Time Warner and what impact that'll have on the United States, or another big bank merger, or a Chinese company buying another big American company. You're not going to hear any discussion about those things because policy doesn't draw eyeballs and therefore doesn't make profit for networks. It's merely something we all need to know in order to be, educated citizens. As Jefferson said, if you think that you can have a government without having an educated populace, you long for something that never was and never will be. The consequence of this is that our media basically have two ways of dealing with political issues: as sports, who's winning, who's losing, and as soap opera, who's the bad guy, who's the good guy. Yeah. And that's the only way, and who's getting hurt and who's happy. That's the only way that they can deal with it. And so they can throw the Korea thing into that frame, and suddenly Kim Jong-un becomes this cartoon character, and so does Donald Trump. Or they can throw, domestic policies into one of those two frames. But those frames do not serve America. They do not inform us. They do not help us make good decisions. They do not hold our politicians to account. They don't hold our corporations to account. And all the more the shame. It's an absolute shame. Michael, excellent point. Thank you for the call. Terry in Homestead, Florida. Hey, Terry, what's on your mind?
Hey.
Terry? Terry? Uh-oh. Terry's got a problem. Okay, I'm going to put Terry on hold here. He's on line 3. Nate, maybe you can figure out what's going on. Dee in Bellevue, Washington. Hey, Dee, what's up?
Just in reference to Melania Trump suing everybody for saying something negative about them, how about them, the other side, Trump mentioning President Obama to wiretapped him, Ted Cruz's father killed JFK, and on and on and on. Why can't we sue them for defamation of character?
Because we are not billionaires.
Out for the post office, all the funds in the post office.
Yeah. I understand your point, Dee, and it's in a rational world, it's a perfectly logical question. But billionaires have the power to do that and not be injured if they lose. Odds are you and I don't.
We're being silenced.
Well, I'm not sure anybody's being silent. It's just that people are being careful to double and triple vet their sources.
Have you seen the GQ magazine photos of Melania, with the G string and the gun on?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think everybody's seen those.
We're being silenced. That's not top model.
No, I don't disagree, but it's not terrible either. What it is something that the black wife of a black president never would have been able to get away with. If anything, what we're looking at here is white privilege on display. If Barack Obama had been as malinformed or misinformed or uninformed as Donald Trump, it would have blown up in his face. If his wife had posed semi-nude, it would have blown up. He never would have gotten the nomination. If he had been through 3 wives and had 5 kids by 3 wives, it would have played to all the worst stereotypes. That's the thing that I think is really something we should all notice here. Along with what you're pointing out, the fact that billionaires can basically, write the rules for themselves. Dee, thank you for the call. And thank you all for being with us this week. Quite a week, busy week, a lot going on. I don't think it's going to stop. And, let's all say a prayer for peace in the world, okay? Something we can do. And don't forget, democracy requires all of us. It's not a spectator sport. Get out there, get active, tag, you're it. We'll see you on Friday.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com. Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit tomsbeets.com.
I'm Nina Turner, and you're watching Free Speech TV.